so we have a big stack of purple slips to deal with, and I'm just going to run through a few of them that I think I can answer quickly. So one question is, have any of these studies demonstrated a relative risk ratio of 2 or higher, the standard used by federal courts for admissibility of scientific evidence? So I'll just make a quick comment. I'm quite familiar with this issue and the federal reference manual used to train judges. There's not a bright line for relative risk. This has sometimes been construed that way for individuals, but not on a population level. Another question related, I think this has been an important issue in the discussion, a clear definition of premature mortality, and then the comment is versus harvesting. And early on there's been a substantial discussion. Here really the issue is, for these premature deaths, how much life shortening has gone on. And historically, when these day-to-day studies that were mentioned were first done, the question was, well, how much life shortening is there? And these longer-term studies became very important because they pointed to a longer degree of life shortening, not just a day-to-day, but perhaps some matter of months to years, something of public health significance. So there's not a definition that we care about 1 day of life shortening, 10 days of life shortening. None of us would want to have our lives shortened from a public health perspective, but there's not a bright line in this discussion. Bob, you have an addition?
Quick comment on the first question on the relative risk of 2.
Yeah.
To me, the question is related to it indicating that you're looking at surrogates for the real factors. In other words, when you have a relative risk of 2 or so, there's historically there's a strong indication that what you've measured is not the cause.
Yeah.
So I think that's the point.
Yeah. Let's not go there. I think it's largely based around a calculation of the attributable risk in those who are exposed to a factor and probability of causation. You're a little bit off. But we can talk about that privately. There's a discussion here about tire tread rubber, very high percentage of carbon black as a filler material. How is this separated from the carbon of diesel exhaust in these studies, since there's obviously heavy tire wear in the same locations as fuel usage? I know around the coarse PM fraction there has been discussion of the potential contribution of materials from tire wear. Perhaps there's somebody who can comment specifically on any separation of the carbon in the tire material, the tread, from other sources. I suspect once collected as mass on a filter and analyzed, it's probably just carbon, I suspect. But you're hearing that from an epidemiologist. Unless it's fine, yeah.
I'm aware of research that people are trying to parse this out.
Yeah, use the mic.
So there's research being led by Frank Kelly in London, England, to look at the toxicity of particles that come from tire wear compared to other elements of black carbon. And as far as I know, it's showing up as toxic.
Okay. And then a question, are sulfates toxic? And I assume this means sulfate per se, and I think this has actually been looked at in lots of critters, and isn't the answer pretty uniformly not? Is that correct, Roger, or Bob? Somebody help me out.
You have to expose animals to really extraordinary concentrations. So the ability of the respiratory tract to handle inhaled sulfates at levels well above those we typically see is really quite remarkable.
Yeah, and
there are some exceptions like vanadium sulfate, for example.
Right, but if
right. Could I respond to that?
Yeah.
This is a subject that comes up a lot and has been looked at. There's a recent British study report that looked at this evidence, and basically, if you look at sulfate alone, then you have to go to really high levels to see effect. However, it's never alone in the atmosphere, and what they're finding is that it interacts with things like transition metals, that it's an effect modifier. And so places with more sulfate that seems to imbue the particles with more toxicity, not because of the sulfate per se alone, but a particle is an interaction of many things. And so that's really the thinking right now, is that it's an effect modifier. It makes the particle more toxic,
so
but it's not itself the causal
Okay.
toxicity.
Right, so, and
Well,
I think I don't want to dwell too much. We've got some much more complicated questions to go on to. So, another question, and I'm going to read it, and I think it's an important question of explanation. Can you show us one death associated with diesel particle emissions exposure in California? And I think this is a very useful question and relates to understanding of the fact that indeed these are calculations of attributable numbers under models and assumptions, and it's not that anyone could go to a particular person and say, this is the person who was a victim of diesel exhaust, radon, or anything else. I mean, certainly with some exposures we become far more certain, a lung cancer and a heavy and sustained smoker, but these are calculations at a population level, and they don't go down to specific individuals. And I think this is something that's very important to be communicated as ARB or anyone else who does these estimates tells the public about.